Okay, welcome back. This is module number 11. These are some extra slides that I think are interesting. Sometimes people like to use these. If not, it's just a little extra information. Put them in the fifth force if you like or not. Doesn't matter. Just trying to give you a little extra insight. You know, when you want to design a complex system of any sort, and certainly the fifth force could be thought of as a fairly complex notion, you need to develop requirements, flow them down into subsystems, build the subsystems and assemble them together, and then the thing works. For example, Hubble Space Telescope wasn't built in one swoop. We had a whole bunch of subsystems, each one with its own separate requirements, all supporting the ultimate success of the telescope. For example, there's a thermal subsystem, a power subsystem, a pointing and control subsystem, on and on. So the idea of breaking things into manageable parts and managing the parts makes total sense. So that's what we do with the fifth force, and these are the subsystems that you would work on in a workshop. First, the innate personalities, the personalities people are born with. We find, or actually you do it yourself. Each person finds theirs. We chart the team, look at the teams match the task. The culture, which is same methodology applied to groups of people. We look at the strengths and weaknesses and cultures and remedy them if need be. This is a fascinating little piece. Mostly applies to projects, and people find this interesting everywhere. This business about the governing mindset, whether it's performance or cost. And then the root of all leadership, which participants discover in our workshop, which is attitude. And I like the word mindset better for attitude. It's a synonym, but it doesn't have, the mind might have the baggage of attitude. And we use the organizing system to separate it into two parts, the emotions and the thoughts. Then, of course, the 8 behaviors that are the tracers and drivers of the field of both. And then the elephants in the room, the unacknowledged realities. These things can weigh the team down if they're not addressed. So during the workshop, we surface them, prioritize them, and work them through with the context-shifting worksheet. Play with the idea of how you learn. I think there's nothing that's as powerful as repetition. I got this idea from a book called Brain Rules by John Medina. He says we forget 90% of everything we learn in a university class with all its examinations and everything within 30 days. So I wanted to give you a few things to think about. We all know the times table. How'd you learn that? Did anyone learn it the first time they read it? I don't think so. Or how about, how do you habituate the 8 behaviors? No workshop, no matter how powerful, will have staying power unless you have this repetition again. So here's a notional chart about how you go to a workshop, the learning phase. The good news is you don't have to do a workshop every 3 to 6 months. You can do an assessment. It's the same behaviors. Kaboom, lifts them up. Kaboom, lifts them up. Kaboom, lifts them up. So I think over about 2 years they're habituated. You don't need to reinforce any more. Malcolm Gladwell wrote 3 books that I like. The third one's called Outliers. What it's about is how the people who are all the great successes, none of them got it there because of their individual talents. They all got it because of the context in which they were born and found themselves in. He traced the 75 richest people in all history going back to Cleopatra. And he says, for example, if Bill Gates had been born 5 years earlier or later, you never would have heard of him. Or the same thing's true of Steve Jobs. The same thing's true of the Rockefellers, who happened to make their billions on the Industrial Revolution, happened to be in the right place at the right time. And he talks about the need to repeat, to learn. And what he says is that to do anything well, you need to practice for 10,000 hours. One of the great insights into this that started him on this course was noticing that professional Canadian hockey players were almost all born in the same 6 months of the year. Now, what sense did that make? Well, what happens is when you're singled out to be a star and start to get training towards your 10,000 hours to be a good hockey player, they're picked when they're young, and when you're young, and I don't know exactly when, maybe they're 8 or 9 years old, I guess, the difference in the month you were born makes a big difference in your strength and maturity. And I think you all may know that the Beatles were an instant sensation in the U.S. after they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And why was it? It's because they had practiced for 10,000 hours. So think about repetition, how accustomed you are to have it in your life. What would a band be like without a drum beat to keep things going? You ever notice all songs almost have a refrain, a chorus? They repeat some part of it over and over, so you have a little new part, then you repeat the chorus. And how about the repetitions in classical music? All classical pieces have repetitive themes. You may be familiar with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Dun, 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 dun. That's the repetition that keeps you engaged. So the point of this is that you need to repeat the learning for the 8 behaviors, and the best way to do it, other than being in a 3-day workshop, is to do both individual development assessments, team development assessments, read the book, etc. Okay. I showed you this histogram. Actually, I showed you this curve before. I'd like to give you some idea of how we create it. It's pretty obvious. What we started doing when we had accumulating teams in our database, which is about 70% NASA, 30% commercial. And by the way, there's no difference between them. And so we started to just take and bin the scores in histograms. So what you do is you're counting up the number of teams with the same score, and this might be, I don't remember the binning size exactly, but plus or minus 1%. And then you see a curve emerge. Then you fit the curve, the top of this with a curve, and that's your benchmarking curve. Now you notice here 300 teams, well, there's 1,500 more than that actually in our database today. Why don't we update it? Do you remember I talked earlier about how the teams we'd never measured were slowly moving up? If we kept updating the database, then what would happen with picking out of the same organizations is the curve would be getting tougher and tougher. So we just stopped at 300. It's plenty for the precision we need for this. Now I like to get you to think about the team ranking, not in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the quintile. So what we did is we took this area, this curve, took the area, divided into 5 equal parts, and I think this is about the precision of the measurement. I could spend a lot of time explaining statistical precision to you, but it probably wouldn't help, and either you know it already or you don't. So I'd like you to think about the fact that if let's say this is a number of 60%. If you go to 65%, and I'm making these up, that is not a change statistically. You have to read some books on statistics to understand this. It has no meaning whatever. And the reason for the imprecision is 2 things. The first is that the curve from the scores of the individual participants is not exactly Gaussian. It's more like a skewed Gaussian. And secondly, the precision is limited by the small numbers. There's a whole thing around small number precision. So to make it simple, just think about the fact if you change the width of a quintile, you've got a real change. Less than that, probably not real. So I'd like to get you to think in terms of these quintiles. I've got a much fancier slide for this in the main presentation. This is an earlier version of what it's like for teams in the bottom quintiles. People are unappreciated. Conflict is everywhere. They feel excluded. It makes them angry. They act it out. Trustworthiness is low. People don't keep agreements. Blind optimism has replaced reality. There's no commitment to anything that matters. Teams full of victims and blamers, and they're disorganized. That's a bottom quintile team. Contrast it with a top quintile team. Mutual respect, good communications, happy collaboration. People feel included. They like being there. They relate authentically. Trustworthiness is high. They have grounded optimism and grounded in reality. They're 100% committed to the team. They don't permit drama, and everybody knows what they're responsible to do. What could be plainer? So there's that. Now people sometimes say to me, well, you know, how do I know these numbers and these curves actually match performance? Well, the first thing is what's called face validity. It's the slide I just showed you, and again, there's a more elegant version in the main briefing. There's all the anecdotal evidence. I would not believe just the numbers. Trust me, I found over and over teams reporting back, and don't forget we've worked with over 1,000, that the performance and the risk, everything, just tracked with these scores. It's all there. How NASA builds teams has half a dozen stories. I think the examples in the assessments might help you. And let me ask you this. Do you think NASA teams are busy? Look at the voluntary participation. No one's ever been made to do this. Look at this. 1,824 NASA teams. This is astounding to me. These guys and gals all chose to do this. So when you show a client this slide and they say, well, gee, Charlie, I'm not sure. I say, look, we got a choice here. Yes, I can spend the next 3 or 4 hours with all the arguments and data that I can, and tell you the stories and see if I can persuade you. But how about this? Instead of that, why don't you just take 15 minutes online as a median, not an average, as a median, do the assessment, get the report, and see for yourself. It's less time to do that than for us to talk about it. That usually works. Now, sometimes people ask how we pick the 8 behaviors. The 4 dimensions are fundamental. The 8 behaviors I don't think are, but this is how we chose them. They're grounded in core needs, and remember the 4 core needs in the 4 dimensions. Pick 2 per dimension. By the way, we used to use 3. It turns out picking the most important 2 reduced the client's time investment by 50% and actually improved the precision of the measurement. You can read about it in my book. Supported by broad research. One of the big things early on was a study by Gallup of thousands and thousands of teams, and I forget now, but 50 industries and 20 countries. And they found the things that were characteristic of high performance. I put them in the 4D system. It's these same behaviors. Confirmed by experience. I've got some of the best, most experienced people in the world on the 4D team, managers, and every one of them has been part of picking these and validating them. Do we have a way for you to learn them and habituate them? Yes, with experiential learning methods. This is the only learning that really works. University learning doesn't, I'm sorry. Do you get a positive result? Yes. I mean, take appreciation. Once you start to practice this, what you will find is that you get a big positive result when you learn to do this. It just makes your life feel much better. As I mentioned before, this, I believe, is the most precise measurement possible. Adding more would not improve the precision. And here are the 8 behaviors: express authentic appreciation, addressing shared interest, appropriately including others, keeping all your agreements for trustworthiness, expressing reality-based optimism, being 100% committed, resisting blaming and complaining, clarifying roles, accountability, and authority, what we call RAAs, and the most important piece by far is accountability. Now, I think one of the most important elements of this system is that everything interlinks and is interchangeable. How NASA builds teams, chapter by chapter, is organized around the 8 behaviors. So are the team development assessments, the same 8 behaviors. So are the individual development assessments, the same 8 behaviors. So are the workshops and workshop modules, the same 8 behaviors. This is remarkable. You can do a workshop or not, you can do TDAs or not, you can do IDAs or not, you can read the book or not. You can pick and choose from these, and if you use them all, you get the astounding ROI I showed you in an earlier presentation. There we go. That's that segment. I'm going to talk you through an abbreviated form of appreciation. The reason that's in here is when I do talks for groups, they love to do this appreciation piece as a part of their learning. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in a few. Take care, and bye-bye.